He pardoned all of the people who spit on them and beat them and sprayed them and did all these other things to them. When it comes to hypocrisy and the claim of being pro-law enforcement, those comments are absurd. But now let's talk about what is happening in D.C. And we'll get to the legal side of this in a second, because he actually has quite a bit of legal authority when it comes to D.C. When it comes to these other cities, I don't quite see how he could do it, but that's why we're going to talk to an expert about it. But first, here's the one, as someone who is pro-law enforcement, okay, and as someone who's been very critical of the January 6th pardons, this comment by Trump, and this will be number 8, is so hypocritical in the wake of January 6th. We're talking about the same cops, right? The same cops who got the crap beaten out of them on January 6th. And he pardoned everyone. Here's what President Trump said about what he's going to be instructing the D.C. officers. Let's listen.
Entire neighborhoods are now under emergency curfews. Just this past weekend, gunfire went through, and you saw that the Navy Yard. I saw it this morning. They saw that they fought back against law. See, they fight back until you knock the hell out of them, because it's the only language they understand. But they fought back against law enforcement last night, and they're not going to be fighting back long, because I've instructed them and told them whatever happens, they love to spit in the face of the police as the police are standing up there in uniform. They're standing and they're screaming at them an inch away from their face, and then they start spitting in their face. And I said, you tell them, you spit and we hit, and they can hit real hard.
This is the guy who pardoned all of the people who spit and beat up these same cops. It's the same exact police force on January 6th. So when we talk about it, it's not like I'm raising, Dan, why are you bringing up January 6th? Why? Because we're talking about the exact same cops. He pardoned all of the people who spit on them and beat them and sprayed them and did all these other things to them. There's almost nothing that, and this is a big statement because President Trump does tend to contradict himself a lot. But when it comes to hypocrisy and the claim of being pro-law enforcement, those comments are absurd, because someone like me, who defends law enforcement, whether it's the Capitol Police on January 6th or whether it's local sheriff's departments, it doesn't take a lot to be intellectually consistent on this. It just takes a desire to not make it political. You can disagree with me about my views, but you're not going to be able to say that I'm hypocritical. When it comes to the legal side of this, as I said, it does seem that the president has quite a bit of authority in D.C. Here's the mayor of D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser. This is number 14 talking about that.
We're not a state. We don't control the D.C. National Guard. We don't have senators or full autonomy. Limited home rule gives the federal government the ability to intrude on our autonomy in many ways.
How many ways, right? That's the question. How many ways can they do this? How much autonomy and authority do they have? Well, let's ask William Banks. He's a professor of law at Syracuse University. He is an expert on issues like this, military, domestic affairs. He's been teaching for more than 4 decades. He was the founding director of the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism, and it's now the Syracuse University Institute for Security Policy and Law. And he joins us now. Professor, thanks very much for taking the time.
It's nice to be with you. Thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about, because there are a number of legal questions to ask here with regard to authority. Let's start with the sort of easiest one. Can the president take control of the DC police?
Police only in a limited respect, yes. As the mayor said on your tape just a moment ago, DC, of course, is a unique entity in the United States. It's what we call a federal enclave. And they have home rule by statute created by Congress in 1973, the DC Home Rule Act that created the office of the mayor and the office of the DC Council. They make policy for DC. But there's a provision in the same law that gives the President of the United States the authority to declare an emergency in the district and to their control law enforcement in the district for a period of up to 30 days. That's what the president decided to do, and that's what he announced he was doing yesterday. And that involves both the police and the members of the DC National Guard. We should talk about the guards.
Yeah, I want to talk about the National Guard separately, but so let's focus though on declaring an emergency, right? I mean, anyone who actually cares about the numbers will tell you that crime is down in DC. That doesn't mean there is no crime in DC. It doesn't mean DC doesn't still have a crime problem, but it is down. There is no new immediate emergency when it comes to crime in DC. Does that matter? Meaning, does the president have pretty significant autonomy to define what an emergency is?
He does. I mean, he could be challenged. A resident of DC could file a lawsuit to say that his declaration of an emergency is beyond his authority under the DC Home Rule Act. But I bet dollars to donuts that there's no judge in the District of Columbia that would second guess the president's declaration there. President's the decision maker.
Got it.
And he finds some facts, whether they're reasonable or unreasonable, is one question that you and I could talk about. But I don't believe that a court would second guess the president's determination here.
All right. So he's got at least 30 days there as a legal matter. So let's talk about the National Guard. And again, people need to separate this stuff out. I think everyone's sort of lumping this all in together. These are different entities with different rules that apply. So let's now talk about the legal justification with regard to the National Guard.
Good. So, because DC is a unique entity in the United States, the governance and control of the National Guard is also different than it is in all the other states and territories. By statute, the commander of the DC National Guard is the President of the United States. He's in charge. In Maryland, it's the governor. In Virginia, it's the governor. In New York, it's the governor. But in DC, it's the president. So he had the authority to deploy them if at a moment's notice. And he didn't need to rely on the DC Home Rule Act to do that. He could call the guard out. As you said in your comments a few minutes ago, we pardoned all these January 6th protesters. He would have had the authority on January 6th, just to back your story up a moment. He would have had the authority on that day, the first sign of trouble in the Capitol on January 6th, breaking down windows, climbing in, all the rest. He could have called the guard out on that day to stop the violence.
Yeah. Yep. And I should point out that I was interested to see that there was a 1989 legal opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel during the first Bush administration that basically said he could use the DC Guard to carry out law enforcement missions with regard to the war on drugs.
Yes. Most people don't have a clear picture of what the DC Guard is. It's a small force. They're just over 2,000 members. And of course, these, like in the National Guard in the States, these are part-time soldiers. They have day jobs, they have families, they live in the DC community, and they're normally not working as guards people. They're doing their day jobs in their lives. So when he calls them out, I believe his announcement yesterday was that he was going to deploy 800 members of the DC National Guard. That's a significant portion of the Guard. And they don't have unlimited resources. They can only do so much.
Yeah. We're talking to Professor William Banks from Syracuse University about the legal questions. And so far, it seems that as a legal matter, it's pretty clear that the president does have the authority to do what he has been doing so far. And even the mayor of DC seems to be conceding that. But he went even further in talking about what may be next. And this is what I want to ask Professor Banks about next. Let's listen. This is number 2. This is the president talking about what he may do next.
And we're going to have the same thing here. But then I'm going to look at New York in a little while. Let's do this. Let's do this together. Let's see. It's going to go pretty quickly. And if we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. We have a mayor there who's totally incompetent. He's an incompetent man. And we have an incompetent governor there. Pritzker's an incompetent. His family threw him out of the business, and he ran for governor. And now I understand he wants to be president. But I noticed he lost a little weight, so maybe he has a chance. You know, you never know what happens. But Pritzker's a gross incompetent guy, thrown out of the family business. But when I look at Chicago and I look at L.A., if we didn't go to L.A. 3 months ago, L.A. would be burning like the part that didn't burn.
All right. So, Professor Banks, what could the president do? Let's assume he's going to push the envelope, right? As I would expect he will. What might he do that could survive legal scrutiny?
I think there's very little he could do outside of the district. As you undoubtedly know, his actions in California earlier this year, the LA ICE situation, was highly unpopular, certainly in California. He was sued almost immediately by the governor. There's a trial going on in Los Angeles as we speak on the lawfulness of the president's orders in that case. And I think it's because in every state outside of the District of Columbia, the commander of the guard is the governor, not the president.
Yep.
And the default posture of the National Guard is to act in obedience to the governor's orders. So if it was Illinois, if it was Pennsylvania, if it was New York, it doesn't matter. It's the governor who makes the calls there. And if the president sought to circumvent the governor or to leapfrog the governor's authority there, he would be in serious legal jeopardy. There is a device or two available to the president, and we could talk about that.
Yeah, well, I want to hear about that, but let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. I hear you saying that he would have great difficulty having it survive a legal challenge, but as we see in California, it seems it's act first, sue me later, right? Yes. So as a practical matter, wouldn't that mean that he would say, I am calling for the New York National Guard, I am calling for the Illinois National Guard, they're going to go, and then the governors end up suing him in court, and as you just pointed out, there's still ongoing litigation here months later for what happened in Los Angeles.
Yes. You know, that's sort of Donald Trump's MO throughout his career, isn't it? Take action and then wait for the lawsuits. And so you're right. It's no different here, except I think that the lawsuits would be quicker to be sparked. And if his counsel is paying close attention to what the law permits, in California, he did have a legal hook on which to hang his coat. That was that he was sending a force to California in a protective mission to protect the ICE personnel on the ground who were trying to enforce immigration law. In fact, the protests in California were peaceful. Individuals were by and large just exercising their First Amendment rights, but the troops were sent there to make sure that nobody stood in the way of the ICE officials doing their job. There is a statute that authorizes that specific role for the federal armed forces.
So is that what you were talking about when you said there are a couple of possible exceptions?
Yes. Yeah.
Why don't you lay those out for us? Just lay out for us clearly what are the potential exceptions?
Yeah. This is one. It's in an arcane federal statute that has very rarely been invoked, maybe 3 or 4 times in 200 plus years of history. It allows for a federal force to be deployed in the states when a federal operation or a federal installation is threatened. And his argument was then that the federal buildings and federal personnel were at risk because of violent protesters seeking to stand in the way of ICE officials do their job. That's one. A much more sort of broadly pitched exception is something called the Insurrection Act.
Yeah.
The Insurrection Act has been around since the days of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. known by different names over all of that history, but the modern euphemism is the Insurrection Act. And it basically allows the president to federalize an incident in a city or a state by declaring that there's an insurrection ongoing, officials who are threatening the survival of the state. In effect, it means, according to the kind of rhetoric that the president would use, all hell is broken loose. And because you're unable to control the situation when all hell is broken loose, I'm going to send in the cavalry. I'm going to send in the U.S. military. That law has only been utilized a handful of times in our entire history. The last time, 1992, ironically, in Los Angeles, in response to the acquittal of the police who were charged with beating up the motorist Rodney King. George H.W. Bush federalized that incident in 1992. And he did so not on his own initiative, by the way. He did so because then governor of California, Pete Wilson, asked for it.
Mm. Right. And that's typically the way it works, is that the governor will request it. And
that's right.
That is why we have something unique in California where the governor is suing over it. We're talking to Professor William Banks from Syracuse University, who's an expert on the role of military in domestic affairs, about what is happening in D.C. Let me play this. Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, just concluded a press conference, and she spoke about this. This is number 27. This is from the press secretary moments ago.
Approximately 850 officers and agents were surged across the city. They made a total of 23 arrests, including multiple other contacts. Last night, these arrests consisted of homicide, firearms offenses, possession with intent to distribute narcotics, fare evasion, lewd acts, stalking, possession of a high-capacity magazine, fleeing to elude in a vehicle, no permits, driving under the influence, reckless driving, and a bench warrant.
All right. Well, that doesn't really tell us anything. I mean, that's just a list of various crimes. I mean, you could literally go through any police department in any city in America and list all of the various crimes that were committed, and it will sound terrible. But here's the more important question, because as Professor Banks was telling us, there is, as a legal matter, a 30-day window with regard to use of the DC police as distinguished from the National Guard. So she was asked about the timeline. And again, this just happened moments ago. This is number 28. Let's listen.
Is there a timeline for the security operations here in DC? And also, is there going to be an immigration component to this? And what would that look like?
Look, if law enforcement officers encounter a criminal in this city and they are an illegal alien, of course, the appropriate measures to detain and deport that individual will be taken, as they should. No city should be a sanctuary for anyone other than law-abiding American citizens, and that has been the position of this administration since day one. As for the timing, we will reevaluate and reassess and make further decisions after this 30-day period is up. But within these 30 days, our entire focus is making sure that this is the most efficient operation possible, and that we are removing as many criminals from the streets, and we are cleaning up DC as best as we can, and working with the Metropolitan Police Department to do that. I know the mayor just spoke several minutes ago. I was watching her on television, and she said that an increase in law enforcement officers on the streets will be helpful to deter crime in this city. And we look forward to working with these brave men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department to remove criminals off of our streets and to keep law-abiding citizens in the district safe.
Look, as someone, again, who is very pro-law enforcement, I host a live police show every single weekend for 3 hours on Friday and Saturday nights where we follow police. More police officers is a good thing. It's also not a long-term strategy. Now, I'm not saying that, again, what the president is trying to do here is get some of the people, particularly on the left, to yell and scream and say, you know, this is awful, this is terrible, and they position them as anti-law enforcement or anti-crime fighting, right? You're certainly not going to lure me into that trap as someone who, again, consistently has been pro-law enforcement. But that isn't really the answer long-term to the question of what are you going to do about crime in DC. And more, just as importantly, every time I hear them talk about, law-abiding citizens, you have to think about January 6th. You have to say, wait a sec. This is the same administration who just pardoned and gave clemency to all of the January 6th laws. But Professor Banks, it does seem like she too is recognizing this 30-day window, right? It seems clear the administration is recognizing the legal constraint to some degree.
The thing about the 30-day decree is that it can be renewed. On day 30, he can simply say, we've got a good start here, but there's more that needs to be done. Therefore, I'm going to issue an identical decree for the next 30 days. And there's nothing to stop that from happening over and over and over again.
So as a legal matter, again, National Guard and DC Police, it sounds like you're telling us that the president has the power as a legal matter to use the DC Police and the DC National Guard as long as he wants.
That's right. Unless or until the Congress changes the underlying statute. And of course, that's not going to happen.